all over the globe to join us at Temple Israel's Hillbrow 20th Shabbat Shuva event. Just to say that up front, I'm going to mention you personally later, I'd like to welcome so many distinguished people who are with us tonight. I'd like to welcome the Rabbonim, the leadership of our movement, our congregants and friends from around the globe. Temple Israel started the Shabbat Shuva, we call it, was a dinner in a previous era before COVID-19 in 2001. So it is now in its 20th year. And as Shabbat Shuva is the Shabbat that falls between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and as Shuva means actually to return, we thought it would be a wonderful tradition being in Hillbrow, which is in the inner city, which has a lot of challenges, with many disadvantaged Jewish people still living in the area around us, to start a return to Judaism for those people, to be part of a warm, wonderful Jewish family. And the shuls in Gauteng, whom you'll be hearing from this evening, joined us at the dinner after the service. At the dinner, we welcomed 60 to 80 Jewish people, many with the Chevre Kadisha, many living on their own, and many not affiliated any longer to an official Jewish organization or synagogue. So we welcome them to return to Judaism and a loving family. And it grew year by year. Now, of course, in COVID-19 era, we cannot have that return of all these incredible Jewish people around us. So Rabbi David Benjamin, whom I'm going to introduce you to and who has been associated with Temple Israel since about 2017, had the idea that we should do a Shuva, a return to our rabbinical roots. Everyone knows the most famous rabbinical foundation of our progressive movement in South Africa, Rabbi Moses Cyrus Weiler of blessed memory, who has been celebrated many, many times and is part actually of the anti-apartheid fight in South Africa. So who we would honor now is the next rabbi that followed in his shoes at Temple Israel Hillbrow. After this year, we will be honoring rabbis throughout the country. Next year, I'd like to announce it will be Rabbi Sherman in Cape Town. And so we will go around the country to the rabbinical roots, to their idealism, to their political activism, to their congregational zeal. This is what has built every progressive Jewish member in South Africa today. And so I'd like to now bring messages to you from the key people who are leading the South African Union of Progressive Judaism. And to start with, we'd like to give you a message from Rabbi Julia Margolis, who is actually the chair of the South African Association of Progressive Rabbi, and so she'll be speaking to us in that capacity. And we have this beautiful video to share with you. Rabbi Margolis.
Shana Tova. Dear Temple Israel, thank you for inviting me to give you the blessing for this Shabbat Shuva service. The time is now. We're gathered around, so bring all your gifts and bring all your burdens with you. No need to hide, arms open wide. We gather as one to Makom, a Makom Kadosh. We come to tell, we come to hear, we come to teach, to learn, we come to grow. And so we say, the time is now. Sing to the one. God's presence is here. Shechina, you will dwell among us. We'll make this space a holy place to separate so whole. Rejoice every soul who enters here. And for me, Temple Israel always is a very, very special and holy place. And I think it's absolutely remarkable how from year to year, services on Shabbat Shuva are being special in every possible way. And during this pandemic period, there is a blessing and a curse, as many people can attend service with you tonight. And we all hope that this year will bring us health, that we will be able to celebrate with you many more Shabbatot in real life and not only on Zoom. And may our year will be blessed, as sweet, as good. יהיה רצון מלפניך, אדוני, אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו ואימותינו, שתחדש עלינו שנה טובה ומתוקה. O God and God of our ancestors, eternal God of all generations, may your presence in our lives this new year renew our spirits and renew our strength. May it be a good year. May it be a sweet year. Shana Tova.
Shana Tova, Rabbi, and thank you so much on behalf of the Association of Progressive Rabbis. Rabbi Julia is also the rabbi of Beit Gloria, and we welcome all of her congregants with us as well. When we had our Shabbat Shuva dinner, the rabbi, who was then the rabbi at Beit David, and he's absolutely backed by his chairman and everyone, would rush over after the service to lead the dinner as well. And so it gives me great pleasure to welcome and ask Rabbi Adrian Schell, who today is the rabbi of the Wimbledon Reform Synagogue in South London, who has shared so many Shabbat Shuva dinners and other events with us in Hillbrow. Rabbi Schell, over to you.
Thank you so much. And a very special thank you to Riva for the invitation to join you all again for Shabbat Shuva in Hillbrow. How wonderful it is to be here, thanks to Zoom and to the time difference between Johannesburg and London, which will enable me to lead a little bit later also the service for my congregation. Chaim and I would like to extend our best wishes and wishes of our congregation in Wimbledon for a good and blessed new year to all of you. Our Torah portion for this Shabbat includes 3 times Moses' encouragement, Chazak ve'imatz, be strong and resolute. We know that South Africa has been hit hard again, very badly by the COVID pandemic. Therefore, we'd like to add to our best wishes for a speedy recovery of those directly or indirectly affected by the pandemic, also the blessing of an encouragement to you to be strong and resolute. Please continue to stay together as a community, as friends, as representatives of the divine. Where you can, bring healing to the world around you. Where needed, bring comfort, and when necessary, please stay safe. Gema Chatima Tova from us in London to you in Johannesburg. Shana Tova.
Shana Tova, Rabbi and Chaim. Beautiful to see you, and thank you for joining us. And now it also gives me great pleasure to share with you a video from Rabbi Greg Alexander, who is representing the Temple Israel Cape Town, which is, I don't know, 3 shores, I think, but it's really nearly 50% of the South African Progressive congregation. So without any further ado, over to Rabbi Greg Alexander from Cape Town.
Shabbat Shalom from our Temple Israel community here in Cape Town to your Temple Israel community in Hillbrow, Johannesburg. We know, of course, the history of Temple Israel Hillbrow as the mother synagogue of our movement, and we know that we always are grateful of the founding work and the history that comes with your community. But of course, it's not just about what was, but it's about what is and what shall be. Shabbat Shuva is the Shabbat between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and we know that for Temple Israel Hillbrow, it's a very important Shabbat historically to be able to celebrate the uniqueness of your community. So on this Shabbat Shuva, as we begin 5782, we wish you all that this year ahead will be a year of blessing, a year of fruitfulness, a year of growth, both as a community and individually, and that the year ahead will be filled with simcha, with celebration. Shana Tova and Gamar Chatima Tova.
Thank you, Rabbi Greg Alexander, and your wonderful, wonderful community in Cape Town. I now would like to introduce the chairman of Bet David, who has supported Temple Israel Hillbrow over many, many years by encouraging his rabbis, Rabbi Shel, and a new rabbi you'll be meeting tonight later on, to join us. And he really understands the relevance of our mother synagogue to our movement. Desmond Sweeky, it gives me great pleasure to ask you to share a few words with us this evening.
Thank you, Riva and Rabbi Benjamin, for inviting us to be part of this annual Shabbat Shuva service. Bet David in Sandton is privileged to be part of what will become a new tradition of dedicating the service to the memory of a leader of progressive Judaism in South Africa. Shabbat Shuva is always special, and this evening is no different as we join with Temple Israel again and honor the memory of Rabbi Arthur Super of blessed memory. Although I've never met Rabbi Super personally, he has played a very important role in my family's life. My late mother-in-law, Betty Weitzman, Zichrona Levracha, studied with Rabbi Super and was converted to progressive Judaism under his supervision at Temple Israel during the 1960s. Betty always spoke highly of Rabbi Super. Ashley and I are very grateful for his learned influence and leadership, of which we will no doubt hear more during the service. I wish you all Shabbat Shalom, Shana Tova, Tikatevu, V'Techatemu. May we find Sabbath peace and both inscription and seal for blessing. Thank you.
Thank you, Desmond, for that lovely message. We look forward to continuing to work closely with you and your congregation at Bet David. And now I'd like to introduce you to a wonderful rabbi, the rabbi of Beit Emmanuel, Rabbi Zahar Sheket. Rabbi Sheket as well, as soon as he landed in South Africa, came and also joined us after his service at every Shabbat Shuva dinner, and has a particular place in his heart for the Mother Synagogue in Hillbrow and all that we can achieve together as a progressive Jewish community in South Africa and our continent. And he is really, I'd like to welcome Rabbi Sheket and your congregation from Beit Emmanuel who are joining us this evening. Over to you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Riva. Thank you, Rabbi Benjamin. Thank you all. It's great to be here with you, and it's great to show that concord and unity of our movement in this evening as Shabbat Shuva. And I can only wish for us all that next year we will be in Temple Israel Hillbrow doing a proper dinner to the neighborhood like we used to do and broadcasting it via the video to all over the world as we are. And I'm wishing for us a great evening this evening, and thanks for the program you've made for us, and thanks for the investment in our history and in our heritage. That is much appreciated, much appreciated. Shana Tova u'metuka, everyone. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Rabbi, short, sweet, to the point, and we value those words, and we value you, and we value your congregation. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Rabbi David Benjamin, who will conduct the service this evening. Rabbi Benjamin first visited Temple Israel Hillbrow for the first time in February 2017. And I introduced him to the concept of Temple Israel Heritage Center, which is a separate non-profit organization aimed at justice. And he fell in love with Temple Israel and its congregants as well, and has been part of our community ever since. And Rabbi, I must thank you with your unbelievable commitment that you have to your beautiful congregation in Israel, Kiryat Ono, and all your other commitments, that you still have time to do a service and to partake in our Shabbat Shuva traditional dinner not tonight event. And you were with us last year in South Africa at both the event and the dinner. So Rabbi David, thank you for leading the service and being so committed and loyal to both your South African heritage, your current Israeli citizenship, and to our progressive movement. Over to you, Rabbi David.
Thank you so much, Riva, and thank you for everything you do. And maybe just a small correction. I think the last time I was in Johannesburg was at least 2 years ago. The time
was it last? Sorry, yes, no. You're right. Our Shabbat Shuva event was also on Zoom last year.
Yes, that's
quite right.
Correct. So let's begin our service by singing Yedid Nefesh. Yedid Nefesh, a popular Sabbath chant. It's on page 126 of the Mishkan Tfilah Sidur, and our tech guy, Jacob, will kindly put it up on the screen. There we go. So please, many of you may be accustomed to these services on Zoom. If you're not, the idea is that you don't feel inhibitions because you put yourself on mute, but you do sing along. Just have to kind of willingly suspend any disbelief you may have. So, Yedid Nefesh. Yedid Nefesh Avarachaman, Yedid Nefesh Avarachaman, Meshoch Avdecha El Retzonecha, Meshoch Avdecha, la 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 la, El Retzonecha, Yarutz Avdecha, Kemo Ayal, Ishtachave lai 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 lai, Mul Hadarach, Yedid Nefesh Avarachaman, Yedid Nefesh Avarachaman, Meshoch Avdecha, El Retzonecha, Meshoch Avdecha, la 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 la, El Retzonecha. And we now go to lighting the candles for Shabbat. And I'm going to ask Sarona and Jacob. Sarona is a dedicated member of Temple Israel, as is Jacob, who is not only on the board of Temple Israel, but also the tech guy who's behind all the wonders of Zoom that we've been able to produce over the last couple of years. So please go ahead with the Sabbath candles, Sarona and Jacob.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav tzivanu la'ad lifnei shel Shabbat. Blessed are you, eternal our God, sovereign of the universe, who has us with mitzvot, commanding us to kindle the lights of Shabbat.
Amen.
Amen.
And a Shabbat Shalom to everybody. And this is also time to say Shana Tova and Gmal Chatima Tova to everyone. We're now on Lechuner Ananal Adonai, which is on page 130, page 130. 130. Lechuneranena, lechuneranena, lechuneranena l'Adonai. Lechuneranena, lechuneranena, lechuneranena l'Adonai. Naria, naria, letzui shenu, letzui shenu. Naria, naria, letzui shenu, letzui shenu. Lechuneranena, lechuneranena, lechuneranena l'Adonai. Lechuneranena, lechuneranena, lechuneranena l'Adonai. And we now turn to page 138 for the singing of Lecha Dodi. And here I would like to introduce Professor David Bilchitz, who is a veteran lay reader and volunteer for Temple Israel, who has been with the congregation for many years and stepped up so many times in support of Temple Israel and in making sure that the temple has kept its doors open continuously, never missing a Shabbat service until now. And so Professor Bilchitz, who's joining us from the UK.
Great. Thank you very much, Rabbi David, and good to see you, and greetings to everyone in Johannesburg and those who've joined across the world. I don't know if I can't see myself, so let me just see there. There we go. It's so good to be with all of you. It has been a pleasure to be with Temple Israel. I did obviously for a period lead services very regularly in person, but over the last period have roughly every month had a chance to lead the Kabbalat Shabbat, and be wonderful to be with you all. And we read tomorrow the portion of Vayelech, and one of the interesting aspects of it is that there's a commandment to write, in a sense, this poem, etc., by Moses, which relates to the poem that will come up called Ha'azinu. But that is understood by the Talmud to be that every individual is required to write their own Torah. And that's a very interesting requirement, and often understood physically to write their own Torah. But I like to understand that also in some senses metaphorically, that we're each commanded in some senses to make the Torah our own, to write the Torah in a way that can relate to us in a personal way, and that can make sense and meaning to us. And that is something I think that Temple Israel has been striving to do for its congregants. So congratulations, and hopefully in the next year, Shana Tova to everyone, and that we will make meaning for ourselves in our own way and write our own Torah. And so without further ado, we're going to lead ourselves into Lecha Dodi. We'll change tune midway at the Lord Teboshi. So we'll start with the traditional view tune, and then we'll go. We're going to do all 9 verses. So we're going to go through the whole lot, and then we'll stand up. Those of you not familiar with it, actually all of you are, but you need to face a door. Okay, you need to face a door where we welcome the Shabbat bride in, and we're going to kind of bow towards the door, then bow towards a different direction as we welcome it into our room. And I have my husband Ruby Ziegler over here on the side, and we'll hopefully end off with a little bit of a dance, which you're welcome to join in your own spaces to dance with us. So without further ado, Lecha Dodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela, Lecha Dodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela, Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad, Yishmianu el ha'meyuchad, Adonai echad, Shemo echad, V'shem u'tiferet v'litila. Lecha Dodi Dodi, Lecha Dodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela, Lecha Dodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela, likrat Shabbat lechuben elecha, ki hi mekor habracha, meirosh mikedem nesucha, sof maaseh b'machshava tchila. Lecha Dodi Dodi, Lecha Dodi likrat kala, פני שבת נקבלה, לך דודי לקראת קלה. Pnei Shabbat nekabela. Jacob, I think we need the text again for some people, because the text has gone off. Mikdash melech ir melucha, kumitza imi. Tocha hafecha, rab lach shevet be'emek habacha, v'hu yachmol alayichem la. Lecha lecha dodi dodi, lecha dodi likrat kala. Pnei Shabbat nekabela, lecha dodi likrat kala. Pnei Shabbat nekabela. Fourth paragraph. Hitna ari me'afar kumbi, livshi bigdei tifarteich ami, al yad ben yishai beit halachmi, karva el nafshi ge'ala. Lecha lecha dodi dodi, lecha dodi likrat kala. Pnei Shabbat nekabela, lecha dodi likrat kala. Pnei Shabbat nekabela, hitoreri, kiva orech, kumi ori, uri, shidaberi, kavod Adonai alayich nigla. Lecha lecha dodi dodi, lecha dodi likrat kala. Pnei Shabbat nekabela, lecha dodi likrat kala. Pnei Shabbat nekabela, lecha dodi likrat kala. Yana, pnei Shabbat nekabela. Ay, lecha dodi likrat kala. Yana, pnei Shabbat nekabela. Ay, lo tevoshi, velo tikalami, ma tishtochachi o ma tehemi, bach yechesu aniye ami, v'nibneta ha'ir al tila, lecha dodi likrat kala. Yana, pnei Shabbat nekabela. Ay, v'hayu limshisa hashos ayich, v'rachaku kol mevalayich, yasis alayich Elohayich, ki mesos chatan al kala, lecha dodi likrat kala. Yana, pnei Shabbat nekabela. Ay, yaminu samol et tiferoti, ve'et Adonai taritzi, al yad ish ben parti v'nismacha v'nagila, lecha dodi likrat kala. Yana, pnei Shabbat nekabela. Ay, lecha dodi likrat kala. Yana, pnei Shabbat nekabela. Nai, boi v'shalom, ateret balam, gam besimcha ub'tola, toch emunei am segula, boi chala, lecha dodi likrat kala. Yana, pnei Shabbat nekabela. Ay, lecha dodi likrat kala. Yana, pnei Shabbat nekabela. Nai, yana, And so we're on the cusp of Shabbat now, and the Lecha Dodi is that transitional prayer. It is still not Shabbat, as David mentioned in the United Kingdom, and Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbat actually brings in the Shabbat. So I'm gonna hand back to David for Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbat, but we can just sing together as we start the Mizmor Shir together, and we will bring in the Shabbat later. And with that, I wish the Temple Israel community a good Shabbat Shuva, a Gamar Chatima Tova, and a Shana Tova, a wonderful year ahead. And may we put this disease behind us and be able to reconnect and regather once again, perhaps next year in the middle of Hillbrow. So let's just begin the song together, and David will take over afterwards. Mizmor Shir leYom HaShabbat, tov leodot l'Hashem, ulezamer l'shimcha elyon, ulezamer l'shimcha elyon, להגיד בבוקר חסדך ואמונתך בלילות, עלי עשור ועלי נהבל, לעלי היגיון בחינום. מזמור שיר ליום השבת, שבת, להודות לאדון, ולזמר לשמך העליון, לזמר לשמך העליון. אני עד השם בפועלך, במעשה ידיך ארנה, מה גדלו מעשיך עד השם מעולם כל מחשבותיך, מזמור שיר ליום השבת, טוב להודות להשם ולזמר לשמך העליון ולזמר לשמך העליון.
Thank you so much, David, and to you two there, Ruvi, in the background for helping out with the dancing. And we wish you a Shabbat Shalom, which is soon to begin in the UK. Here in Israel, it's definitely Shabbat already. So
Shabbat Shalom in Israel, in Johannesburg.
And of course in South Africa. We'll continue now with Tzadik Katamar, which is in the continuation of the psalm for Shabbat. Tzadik Katamar Yifrach Keres Balvanon Izge Shetulim Beveit Adonai Bechatzrot Eloheinu Yafrichu Od Yenuvun Beseva Deshenim Berananim Iyu Lehagid Ki Yashar Adonai Suri Suri Velo Avlata Bo. That, of course, is a melody by Louis Lewandowski, who was one of the great classical composers of Jewish liturgical movement music. And of course, that melody would have been heard in the great sanctuary of Temple Israel for many years, as it still is heard today. And it's a great favorite, by the way, among all the denominations, not even though Lewandowski originally wrote for the Reformers. So we now continue with a few words on my part about Shabbat Shuva, first of all. Shabbat Shuva, the word Shuva means return, and it's taken from the Haftarah, which we read on Shabbat Shuva, which begins with the words Shuva Israel ad Adonai Elohecha ki chashalta ba'avonecha, which means return Israel to God, your Lord, your God, because you have fallen into sin, you have failed in sin. The theme of return is a very prominent one in Judaism, and we encounter it again in a quote that we sing in our Siddur every week when we put the Sefer Torah away, which is Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva chadesh yamenu kekedim. It's taken from Megillat Eicha, right, which we read on Tisha B'Av, and that means return us, O God, to you, and we will return. Renew our days as of old. So this suggests to us that the idea of return doesn't only mean return to the path of God, okay, as it says in Haftarah, but there's an extra element, which is, of course, part of it, which is also about returning to days of old. And the idea is that if we look back to days of old, that will actually help us to return to God, because by looking back, it will just help us remember where we come from, what we're all about. What are we doing here in the first place? How did this all begin? How did we get to where we are today? So this is a very useful exercise if we want to return to God. And the idea here in Temple Israel is we're doing that every year. We've been doing it now for the last 20 years. But now in the sense of returning specifically to the history of the progressive movement in South Africa, and each year taking a look at a leader of our glorious past, who of course, whose influence carries through to the present. And we have a stellar example this evening, and if I may use a pun, maybe a supernova, which of course was Rabbi Arthur Supert, quite a remarkable individual by all accounts. And we're fortunate today that we're reading the portion of Vayelech. On Shabbat Shuva, sometimes the portion is Ha'azinu and other times Vayelech. Depends what's going on in the Jewish calendar at the time. And the reason Vayelech is very appropriate is because, among other things, it talks about the passing of the responsibility from Moses to Joshua. And of course, in the case of Temple Israel Hillbrow, and if you like, the entire reform movement in South Africa, we started out with Moses, our own Moses Cyrus Weiler, Moshe Chaim Weiler. And there was a brief period in between when there was no rabbi, and then there was a Rabbi Ofer for a very short amount of time. But you could say that the substantial rabbi, the successor that came after Rabbi Weiler was definitely Rabbi Super, who was with the congregation for 11 years. In our invitation, I think we mentioned that he was around for 14 years. So he was about 14 years in South Africa, but 11 years with the congregation. And he was actually considered the chief minister of the United Progressive Congregation of Johannesburg. But now Rabbi Super was a remarkable individual, not only because of what he did while he was in the position as the head of our movement, at least in Johannesburg. That in itself is a matter of discussion with historical perspective. But also who he was. Rabbi Super was an incredibly gifted student. He was born in the UK. His family moved to Australia. His father was a rabbi, a chazan, and a shochet, tried to make a living out of all those, not very successfully, I understand. And Rabbi Super started his shul career as what they call a minyan man, right? Somebody who would get paid to join a minyan when they needed a minyan. And but he was a brilliant student, and he was accepted to Oxford University. Sorry, I beg your pardon. My apologies, to Cambridge University, where he got double firsts in Oriental languages. He received an MA degree, and then he went on to Jews College, which is the Orthodox seminary in the UK, was at least, and began to study to be an Orthodox rabbi, but didn't go all the way through. He didn't finally achieve the smicha as an Orthodox rabbi. So he went from that point by the title of Reverend. But with that title of Reverend, he led congregations and was involved in all sorts of activities. Among other things, he was a British military chaplain. And he actually visited several war zones during the Second World War as a chaplain. And he was also present at the liberation of Bergen-Belsen. There are pictures documenting that. And he was very active in organizations dealing with Jewish refugees in Europe. He was very active in the early Zionist organizations. And for about 30 years, he was in various posts. He did various things, including being a minister to a congregation in the UK. But he was best known at that stage as a journalist. He was a very successful journalist. And him and his wife, Tilla, in 1951, they were in Canada and they emigrated to Israel. They made Aliyah. And Rabbi Super became a senior editor at the Jerusalem Post. And while in Israel, he also wrote several books. And I understand he was also instrumental in setting up the first Reform congregation in Israel. Now, his name and reputation went before him. And he was invited by the South African, very strong Zionist Jewish community in South Africa to be the editor of the Zionist Record, which you will probably recall was a very important mouthpiece for the Jewish community for many years. So he came to South Africa in 1960 to be the editor of the Zionist Record. And I don't know what the word is, but he was poached by the Reform movement in what was considered a major coup. And he was ordained as a Reform rabbi in an extraordinary procedure. He wasn't required to actually study at the Reform rabbinical seminary, but the president of the seminary agreed that he would sit an exam and then actually agreed to, based on his scholarship and what he'd already done, that he was quite clearly suitable to be a rabbi, so he was ordained. And he became the senior minister, of course, of Temple Israel, but at that time that meant becoming the senior minister of the Johannesburg congregations. Now, Rabbi Super's period, and I'm just going to talk about headlines here, he was considered brilliant. I remember growing up, my late father was a rabbi, and I never met Rabbi Super, but I do remember that his name was always mentioned in a very respectable, very respectful way. He was certainly considered one of the greats of the movement, but he was also very controversial. And perhaps the headline of that was what was called the Cranbrook Concordat. Cranbrook was the name of a hotel. And the Concordat was an agreement that Rabbi Super signed on behalf of the movement in Johannesburg with the Orthodox chief rabbi, who was also an alumnus of Jews College, as it happened. And the idea was to put in writing a modus vivendi between the Reform movement and the denomination of Orthodoxy in South Africa. I'm not going to go into the details of that concordant. It's controversial till this very day. What I will say is that Rabbi Super has to be given credit. You know, today we talk in our portion, it's been mentioned of Chazak be'emat, go be strong and of good courage. He certainly had courage, okay? And I'm sure he went into that agreement with his eyes open of what the consequences would be for him. But it is in fact characteristic of all leaders who undergo compromises on behalf of their constituencies, that they will never be able to please everybody. And of course, there are great examples, right, in world history. Of course, there's the great Nelson Mandela, okay, who, although I think he made a lot of people happy, not everybody was happy. Many considered him a sellout. I think that narrative still exists today. And nobody disputes the greatness of Mandela, but he had to deal with that. The Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, right, made the historical Oslo Accords. Of course, he was also accused of selling out principles, and of course, not on the same scale. But Rabbi Super was accused of similar sins when he signed the Concordat. Of course, he did it on behalf of the congregation in Johannesburg, but the general Jewish community liked to see it as something which would bind the community all over the country, and that in itself was a matter of controversy. So there was controversy around Rabbi Super. He was known as a very strong, important, charismatic, very learned, very, very erudite leader. And he was also an outspoken apartheid activist. We have records of him speaking at Wits University along with Rabbi Sherman, giving a very rousing speech to the students, urging them to retain their idealism and to fight injustice. Rabbi Super, another headline is that he attended the conference of the World Union for Progressive Judaism in 1972. The same year that he spoke at Wits, it was a great year for him. And he persuaded the World Union to join the World Zionist Organization. And that was a watershed moment for World Reform Jewry at that stage, because there was always there was a bit of iffiness about to what extent the Reform movement was Zionist, of course, because they were officially, but that kind of put paid to the non-Zionist element. And from then the movement became very, very openly and very, very predominantly Zionist and joined the World Zionist organizations. Rabbi Super was at the congregation. He started in 1964. He retired in 1975. He made Aliyah to Israel. And what I haven't mentioned until now, and this is really quite remarkable, all the wonderful things that he did while he was paralyzed from the waist down. The man was in a wheelchair for much of his life. And that only adds really to his again, forgive me, to his superstar quality, that he managed to accomplish so much with this incredible disability. Rabbi Super passed away in 1979. He was age 71 and he was living in Netanya, Israel, and he was buried in Herzliya. And it's a great honor for me to pay tribute to him. And I think in the sense that we should, if we look back at days of yore and we remember figures like Rabbi Super, we really can, we must bow our heads in respect and accept that we have so much to learn from a great supernova like Rabbi Super. And before we continue with the service, I need to give a major academic credit and that is to Erwin Manoim, who's with us now. I think I can quite safely call him the official historian, I think official, almost official historian of the progressive movement in South Africa. He has written a wonderful book, and I have to say this, I don't know, because it's a good thing to do during a service, but this is the book. You might think that a history of the progressive movement in South Africa might be boring. Okay, this is not boring at all. It is an incredibly engaging book. Okay, it's actually a page turner. So if you actually haven't tried reading this yet, I highly recommend it. And I know it's available online too. But I want to commend Erwin. And of course, most of the headlines, most of the story that I got about Rabbi Super, I managed to glean from his wonderful book. But Erwin, I'd like to hand over to you. Just if you can give us a few words, we will be very, very privileged. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. It's probably worth mentioning that your own father, of course, was also spoke out strongly against apartheid in his own day, a little bit later than Rabbi Super and in Cape Town. So I think the quick thing about Super was he was loved in Johannesburg and he was hated in Cape Town. In Cape Town, he was considered an Orthodox minister who fiddled his way into the progressive rabbinate on dubious grounds and let down the entire movement by selling an outrageous sellout deal. In Johannesburg, he was well loved just for whom he was, which was a very good community rabbi who fought on bravery despite his physical impairments. So the book, there are still copies of the book on sale from Beit Emmanuel or at the Jewish Museum in Cape Town, $350. Alternatively, visit our website, which contains additional material that's not in the book. In particular, there is a whole chapter about how Reva Foreman took charge of Temple Israel and stopped it being closed down very narrowly in the 1990s. And there are also links to buy the book either in hard copy or in digital form. If you buy it in hard copy in South Africa, they'll deliver it to you. And finally, for the past year, there has been an exhibition at the Jewish Museum in Cape Town called Groundbreakers, which is both an abbreviated version of the book, but with lots of new photographs and artifacts and videos, including, again, videos of Temple Israel and an interview with Reva. And one day, we hope when COVID is spoken about in past tense, the exhibition will come to Joburg. Thank you and Shana Tova.
Shabbat Shalom, Shana Tova. Thank you very much, Erwin, because that fitted in really nicely before we get into the actual evening prayer of Shabbat, which we're going to do now. And here I have the honor to introduce another veteran member of the Temple Israel Lay Readers Corps, and that is Lael Bethlehem, who is really a stalwart and has been a stalwart and still is. Lael, please go ahead with Baruch Hu. And this is on page 146.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody, and Shana Tova. Lovely to be together and wonderful to be in such a wonderful congregation. So we are going to, we've brought in the Shabbat and we're really going to start our prayer properly now with the Baruch Hu. And so we turn north and we say, Baruch Hu et Adonai Hamvorach, Baruch Adonai Hamvorach, Leolam Va'ed. And we daven the beautiful prayer of the evening, which thanks God for the coming of the evening and which sets out in the most beautiful poetic language the power of God to bring forth the evening with simply no more than a word. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bidvaro ma'ariv aravim b'chochma poteach, she'arim uvitvuna meshane itim umachalif et hazmanim, umsader et hakochavim b'mishmorteim barakia, kirtzono borei yom v'layla, golel or mipnei choshech, v'choshech mipnei or, ומעביר יום ומביא לילה, ומעביר מבדיל בין יום ובין לילה, אדוני צבאות שמו, אל חי וקיים, תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני המעריב ערבים.
Shal Koach. Thank you very much, Lael. Shabbat Shalom. On page 150, we sing of God's love for his people. Ahavat Olam. Ahavat Olam. Bet Yisrael. Amcha Aveta. Amcha Aveta. Torah u'mitzvot. חוקים ומשפטים, אותנו לימדת, על כן אדוני אלוהינו בשוכבנו ובקומנו נשיח בחוקיך, ונשמח בדברי תורתך ובמצוותיך לעולם ועד. כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו, ובהם נגה יומם ולילה, ואהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני אוהב עמו ישראל, אוהב עמו ישראל. Page 152, Shema Israel. Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. And it gives me great pleasure and, of course, a great honor to invite Marian Bubbly, who is really the regular standard lay reader for Temple Israel, along with Reba Foreman, in almost all the services where they don't get star guests from overseas. Marian is a rising star in herself. So please, Marian, go ahead with the Vayahafta.
ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך, בכל לבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך. והיו הדברים האלה, אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך. ושיננתם לבניך וברת בם, ובשתך בעביתך, ולכתך בדרך, ושוכבך וקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך. וכתבתם על מזוזות בעתיך ובשעריך. למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותי, והייתם קדושים אלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מצרי ארץ, מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת.
Page 156.
All this we hold to be true and trustworthy for us. You alone are our God, and we are Israel, your people. You are our sovereign and Savior, who delivers us from the oppressor's hands and saves us from the tyrant's fists. You work wonders without number, marvels beyond count. You give us life and steady our footsteps. You performed miracles for us before Pharaoh, signs and wonders in the land of the Egyptians. You led your people Israel out from their midst to the freedom for all time. When your children witnessed your dominance, they praised your name in gratitude, and they accepted your sovereignty. Moses, Miriam, and all of Israel sang to you together, lifting their voices joyously.
Page 158, Shal Koach. Thank you, Mariam. He's also a member of the management committee of Temple Israel. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, מי כמוך נהדר בקודש, נורא תהילות עושה פלא. מלכותך ראו בניך, בוקע ים לפני משה ומרים, זה אלי ענו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. ונאמר, כי פדה אדוני את יעקב, וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו, ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל. We turn to page 160. 160, the Hashkivenu prayer, which we'll say in English, Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom. Grant, O God, that we lie down in peace, and raise us up, our sovereign, to life renewed. Spread over us the shelter of your peace. Guide us with your good counsel, for your name's sake be our help. Shield and help shelter us beneath the shadow of your wings. Defend us against enemies, illness, war, famine, and sorrow. Distance us from wrongdoing. For you, God, watch over us and deliver us. For you, God, are gracious and merciful. Guard our going and coming to life and to peace evermore. Blessed are you, Eternal One, whose shelter of peace is spread over us, over all your people Israel, and over Jerusalem. Baruch atah Adonai, הפורס סוכת שלום עלינו ועל כל עמו ישראל ועל ירושלים. We now move to Veshamru, which is the prayer we sing immediately before the Amidah, which is all about keeping the Shabbat. Veshamru b'nei Israel et ha-Shabbat, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם, ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם, כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, וביום השביעי Shabbat vayinafash. We now have a natural break in our service before we move into the Amidah prayer. And we'll utilize this natural break. I'm going to hand over to Riva because we have several very special guests who will share with us some important messages about the late Rabbi Super. So Riva, over to you.
Thank you, Rabbi David. And I personally did not know Rabbi Super, but he sounds an incredible, unique character, a character and a human being who followed the path that he felt was right. So in searching, we found 3 wonderful candidates who had personally been at Rabbi Super's side in the hallowed, beautiful walls of Temple Israel, Hillbrow. And it gives me great pleasure now to introduce you to Mervyn Dendy. Mervyn, thank you for being so kind to agree immediately. And I know that you were almost going to follow the rabbinical route yourself. A little bird told me it might be wrong. But Mervyn, I know you were very, very close to Rabbi Super. So Mervyn, welcome. I believe you're in Hermanus, is it?
That's correct, yes.
So welcome, and over to you, Mervyn.
Thank you, Riva, and Shabbat Shalom and Shana Tova to everybody. I came to know Rabbi Super very well in the early 1970s when I was one of Rabbi Super's post-bar mitzvah students in a post-bar mitzvah class known as the B'nai Emunah class. This would have been in, as memory serves, 1971, in which there were 9 of us undertaking post-bar mitzvah or post-bat mitzvah studies. And then subsequently, 5 of the 9 of us went forward into a B'nai Torah class the following year, which was also conducted by Rabbi Super. And the idea of these classes was really to give us a far more detailed grounding in Jewish practices, Jewish religious principles, Jewish philosophy and Jewish ethics than would have been given to the ordinary bar or bat mitzvah candidate. I was also very involved in assisting Rabbi Super for a couple of years to conduct Shabbat morning services at Temple Israel, because as some of you may not know, Rabbi Super, before I came to know him, had unfortunately suffered a stroke, which left him paralyzed down the entire right-hand side of his body. He was not, if I may just with respect correct Rabbi David Benjamin in that respect, he was not paralyzed entirely from the waist down, but he was paralyzed down the entire right-hand side of his body as a result of the stroke. And it was a physical impediment that caused him to have to struggle a great deal because apart from anything else, he'd been right-handed before he suffered the stroke. So he struggled even to write. And it is an enduring memory of mine to see Rabbi Super struggling against this impediment to walk, assisted, of course, by a crutch from the rabbi's office on the left-hand side of the Bima at Temple Israel, if you were sitting in the congregation, through to the pulpit, which was on the right-hand side of the Bima, which was a matter of great difficulty for him and took him a minute or two to find his way across the Bima. The thing that I remember, and I want to recount one incident that I remember best about Rabbi Super, was his anti-apartheid activism. In 1972, when I was the tender age of 15, there was a political campaign that was being waged by the then Progressive Party through its sole member of parliament, Helen Suzman, against the human system of migrant labor, which obtained under the Nationalist Party government of the day, which was still, of course, endeavoring to enforce the policy of grand apartheid. And under the migrant labor system, workers, African men whose families were confined to the so-called homelands under the iniquitous Group Areas Act of the day, had to be accommodated in very Spartan and inhuman conditions in hostels in Johannesburg, where they would be accommodated and which they would use as a base from which to proceed to work each day for roughly 11 months in the year, which meant that they were only able to travel home to the so-called homelands and to see their families for about 1 month in the year. Well, Rabbi Super, on one particular Friday evening in which I was present in Shul in Temple Israel, quoted extensively from the Old Testament and in particular from the Torah, and condemned in no uncertain terms the inhumanity of the policy of apartheid, with particular reference to the plight of these migrant workers. It left a lasting impression upon me because at the age of 15, I was only starting to become politically aware and politically conscious. And it struck me at the time that the only political party represented in Parliament in the day, which was even raising this issue, was the Progressive Party through, as I've said, its sole MP at the time, Helen Suzman. And I came to realize immediately, as a result of Rabbi Super's condemnation of the migrant labor system, I came to realize immediately that there was absolutely no point whatsoever in my ever supporting the then official opposition party, which was the United Party, and which was not even raising this issue. And that particular incident turned me really into an ardent supporter of the Progressive Party, and really it made me a political liberal, which I remain to this day. It has conditioned my political thinking right throughout my life. I'm now 64 years of age. I've always voted for the subsequently the Progressive Reform Party, the Progressive Federal Party, the Democratic Party, and I'm now a card-carrying and contributing member of the Democratic Alliance as a result of that exposure to Rabbi Super's condemnation of the apartheid system. He was a man of gigantic intellect, a man of great personal courage, and a man who was concerned not only to apply the principles of Jewish belief to the Jewish community itself, but also in the broader South African context. And he is a man for whom I have only the greatest admiration, and a man whom it was my privilege and honor to have known very well for several of my formative years when I was a teenager at Temple Israel. So thank you again for inviting me to say these few words. And Riva, I hand back to you.
Thank you, Mervyn, so much for being with us. Shana Tova. Back to Rabbi David.
Riva, so you please go ahead and introduce our next guest.
All right. Well, my next guest is another unique person of great integrity who once again follows his own path. I just want to say, Rabbi, and to everyone listening, I understand now why Hashem led me to Temple Israel in 1994, because my background is not a political activism, but a humanitarian activism. And when I went there, I knew nothing of people like Rabbi Weiler and people like Rabbi Super and the people who will speak this evening. People who understand that what purpose has religion if it's not to fight for the iniquities and to do justice, not only amongst ourselves, but amongst those around us. And without further ado, it gives me great pleasure now to introduce the previous Vice Chancellor of the University of Cape Town, Dr. Max Price. I was thrilled when he agreed to speak. And again, he's going to share with us the incredible influence Rabbi Super had on Max's career. And I know today he gives advice to many universities as well as a consultant throughout the world. But Max, thank you so much for agreeing to be with us at the Shabbat Shuva service. Over to you, Max.
Thank you, Riva. The privilege is mine to participate in this Shabbat Shuva service and to help honor Rabbi Super. My story is rather similar to Mervyn's, and Mervyn and I, of course, knew each other from those days. I was the sort of lay reader in the 3 or 4 years before Mervyn took over. So I knew Rabbi Super from when I was about 10, starting Bar Mitzvah classes 3 years before Bar Mitzvah, to the age of 16, when I completed also my B'nai Torah ceremony a few years after Bar Mitzvah. And those were the years 1965 to 1971. Aside from being a student of his and a congregant, I was also a lay reader at many of the Saturday morning services for a few years. And because of Rabbi Super's disability, as Mervyn has explained so well, the lay readers performed many of the functions that rabbis elsewhere might have otherwise done, such as standing at the open ark, taking the Torah out, processing with the Torah through the shul, and then again after the Torah reading, leading any prayers that were recited while the ark was open. And so the relationship felt special because it felt like one was standing in as a proxy for the rabbi and for Rabbi Super, and yet he was at your side all the time, advising and discussing how the service would be led and working through who would do the honors. And I think for the youth who had the opportunity to be his sidekicks, to be his assistants in running the services, it was a huge privilege and a confidence booster. And in a sense, we basked in the admiration and in the prestige that he had, which reflected on us around him. There was always a lovely pause in the service when he would make his way on one crutch down the 4 stairs from the pulpit, where he would have given his sermon and where he would have been sitting during the service, to the bima to give the congregation the parting blessing. And there would have been, the whole congregation was stood and waited for a minute or so while he came down. It was wonderful. And so his disability itself was a significant socializing influence. Not having personally known anyone in a wheelchair prior to that, other than people who were old and mentally in decline, his fortitude, his clear mental astuteness, his determination not to let his paralysis diminish his energy or detract from his mission in life, set him up as a role model in regard to handling adversity and disability. He also, secondly, had a profound influence on my attitudes to Judaism and religion. I was at King David's School, and the rabbis and teachers there, and many pupils reflecting the views of their parents, often taunted the Reform kids. We were in a small minority, and we were repeatedly told that we were not real Jews. As we know, the conflict between Orthodox and Reform movements was at its peak in that period, the late 60s through to the mid 70s or so. But Rabbi Super did not respond to that by mocking them or by putting down orthodoxy. I suppose this in part reflected the fact that he had trained in an Orthodox seminary. He responded rather by presenting an alternative to the dogma and the narrowness and it was that alternative that was compelling and attractive and drew me so deeply into the Reform and kept me going post Bar Mitzvah. I remember the contrasting approaches. At school, the message of the school rabbis around the time of Bar Mitzvah, the message that they gave to all people becoming Bar Mitzvah, was that at Bar Mitzvah you become a son of the law. You become an adult in the Jewish community, and that this meant taking the laws, the rules, and the customs and the observances seriously. It meant adhering to the rituals. For them, living the life of a good Jew meant diligent adherence to these. At my Bar Mitzvah in Temple Israel, Rabbi Super's sermon was the opposite. His message was that now that I had the opportunity, as a Bar Mitzvah boy, I had the opportunity and duty to explore, to question, to spread my wings, to choose what in Judaism was meaningful to me. And on being a good Jew, his message was consistently that it was not about following halacha. It was everything about living out the Jewish values. And he often quoted the famous passage from Isaiah criticizing the Jewish people of the time, for fasting without changing their immoral behavior. Which provides a good segue to the third and most important influence that Rabbi Super had on me, and that it is the same as Mervyn has described, namely, for me, confirming the correctness of taking a stance against apartheid. He argued in sermon after sermon, and especially on the High Holy Days when he had a captive audience that was not already a converted audience to his political views, how Jewish values and Jewish history obliged Jews to stand up against the Nationalist Party government, and through his example, not to remain silent. I was immensely proud of him when he made public statements condemning government policies and actions, when he appeared on platforms and speeches, sometimes at the University of Witwatersrand, and he made me proud to be a Reform Jew, since it seemed to me that the Orthodox leaders were either too inward-looking and focused on religious issues and unwilling to engage with the broader political issues, or alternatively, they were seeing those broader issues but were mute for whatever reason. Of course, there are lots of influences on one's political development as a political being: parents, history, schooling, the media. But I believe that for me, Rabbi Super's influence was probably the most important in my teens. And I thank him for that. And it is an honor and pleasure to be able to pay that public tribute to him this evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Max. It was wonderful to hear that history from you. Thank you for joining us. And now I hand back to Rabbi Benjamin.
So, Reva, I think we have one more guest to speak about Rabbi Super, if I'm not mistaken.
You do, but I have your last instructions and it's still lower down, but maybe it is an appropriate time now.
This is the time.
Is this the time? Good.
Yes, absolutely.
Then I would like to invite someone who has become a very dear and close friend to me personally, who again comes from Temple Israel Hillbrow. It's quite extraordinary. I think in the future, Rabbi David, we must find everyone whose parents or themselves came and have a special service. But now I'd like to introduce you to, is it Hilton Ellis who's next, David?
Yes, Reva, yes, Hilton.
Yes. Hilton, I trust you are with us.
I am, Reva.
Good. And I'd like to say that Hilton also from his beautiful UK synagogue, has also given a full Shabbat service for us, and so joins the wonderful local and international team of rabbis and lay leaders who give their heart and soul to being of service to Temple Israel Hillbrow. Hilton, thank you so much for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you, Eva. And Shabbat Shalom, Shana Tova, and Gmar Chatima Tova to everyone. At the start of the service, I was just gauging around the screens and was delighted to see both Max and Mervyn, who preceded me in lay reading on Shabbat mornings with the late Rabbi Super. Just to correct something, David, in the days when Rabbi Super was at Jews College, they never ordained anyone as a rabbi. In those days, they only went to reverend. And you had later rabbis of the Reform movement. Rabbi Isaac Richards was Reverend Richards from Jews College. Herbert Richer was Reverend Richer from Jews College, because that was the way it was in those days. Rabbi Super joined, as David said, had been at the Zionist Record, and the incident that got him, the Reform movement, to bring him in, when Temple Israel didn't have a rabbi, there was an incident in the UK when the late Rabbi Louis Jacobs should have been made chief rabbi and wasn't, because in 1957, Rabbi Louis Jacobs, who was in his day probably the greatest Jewish thinker of his time, had written a book in 1957 called We Have Reason to Believe, in which he questioned certain basic Jewish tenets as far as the Orthodox were concerned. And Rabbi Super wrote a scathing editorial in the Zionist Record attacking the United Synagogues of the UK. And it was then that Benny Stolson and Jerry Idelson went to see him and asked him to come and assist with services initially, which he did, and then later became the chief minister. As Mervyn and Max said, because of his disability, he battled to get across the bimah, and in the time I was assisting him, it was more a case of wheeling him in a wheelchair across the bimah, and then he would battle to climb the 4 stairs to the bimah. I'm not going to repeat the political side, but I recall often I would be assisting him to put his robe on with the chairman in his office before we came out for a Shabbat Eve service. And he would say to the chairman, "You might be visiting me at John Foster Square next week, because today I attended a rally, or today I spoke at Wits University." And that was a frequent occurrence over the years. To show his stature of leadership in that at Temple Israel and in the community, while he was the rabbi of Temple Israel, every Rosh Hashanah morning, the Israeli ambassador used to attend services at Temple Israel. In those days, the ambassador, I recall, was the late Yitzchak Una, and he used to sit in the second row in front of Rabbi Super's pulpit, and I had my seat in the third row, as Max and Mervyn would recall. Rabbi Super, in his time, the movement in Joburg grew under his leadership. We then, originally it was 3 congregations: Temple Shalom, Temple Emmanuel, Temple Israel, Temple Shalom, Temple Emmanuel. We then had Temple Sinai, and later Temple David, which became Beit David. But when Max says Rabbi Super chose the High Holy Days when he had a bigger audience, most of you know the building of Temple Israel. Take away the side partitions and look at the gallery. There was still an overflow service in the hall next door, or in those days we had an overflow, I think it was opposite, which became a hotel, and the children's service was in the hall. That is how full and how big the membership of Temple Israel was in those days. Due to Rabbi Super's impediment, I was fortunate because I used to do Torah readings, not only read the service, but do Torah readings. And it was when I was helping him to come out on a Saturday morning, I could say whether I had managed to prepare the portion or not. And if I couldn't, he would then do it. But most of the time, I did the Torah readings. he was a superman, as David said. He led by example, he led by courage, and he was respected by his colleagues and the wider Jewish community. Not only, David, did he study with then Chief Rabbi Bernard Casper, he also taught him at some place. And to continue with what Max said about being at King David, I went to King David Lingsfield. Max was at Victory Park a few years before me. And when I went, Rabbi Super said to me, if you want to be involved in the Jewish community, learn how the other half lives. And I used to go into the morning, compulsory Orthodox morning service. When they started at 7:45, people would be in at 7:55. And it was through Rabbi Super's encouragement that I eventually was asked to lead the services. And I said, that's fine, but I'm from Temple Israel. And it took a few days for them to go back and check with the hierarchy. And they said, no, that's fine. And later when B'nai Akiva boys tried to get me to stop leading services because I was Reform, Chief Rabbi then said, when he starts doing the services the Reform way, then you can come back and see me. So Rabbi Super's stature still continues, and I thank you for inviting me to join you this evening.
Thank you so much for that beautiful and warm and really in-depth painting of a picture of a great man who believed in his ideals and values and stood by them. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone who's been part of this magnificent tribute to our historical roots, our historical rabbinic roots of justice and seeking that justice and pursuing it. And now I hand back to our Rabbi, David Benjamin.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really do feel deeply honored to have heard these accounts of Rabbi Super. And maybe the next best thing to him being here with us is to at least hear about some of what he did and accomplished and the incredible impact that he had. I would like to invite Jacob. Jacob has a wonderful slide with some pictures of Rabbi Super. They say a picture paints 1,000 words. So Jacob, if possible. So there we have pictures of Rabbi Super. Obviously, one is when he was a chaplain in the British Army. The other as a young rabbi. And then the bottom picture, it's of a slightly lesser quality because it's taken from a newspaper. But I understand that's at the function that they had at his retirement from Temple Israel before he made Aliyah to Israel with his wife. So that just illustrates the incredible person we've been talking about, Rabbi Super. Zichrono livracha. We continue now with our service with the Amidah prayer. Those of you who are disposed to do so, this is the time to rise and to face Jerusalem from wherever you are. If you're not exactly sure where Jerusalem is from your location, our tradition teaches that if you think about Jerusalem, if you have Jerusalem on your mind, that's good enough. So we're on page 164. Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi agi tehilatecha. Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi agi tehilatecha. Page 166. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elohei avoteinu v'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak ve'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel ve'Elohei Leah, Ha'el hagadol hagibor ve'hanora, El Elyon, gomer chasadim tovim ve'koneh hakol, ve'zocher chastei avot ve'imaot, ומביא גאולה לפני בניהם למען שמו באהבה, זוכרנו לחיים, מלך חפץ בחיים, וכותבנו בספר החיים, למענך אלוהים, אלוהים חיים, מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם, ועזרת צרה. Page 168. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי הכל אתה רב להושיע. משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם, מזריח השמש ומוריד הטל, מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות ומי דומה לך, מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה. מי כמוך אב הרחמים, זוכר יצוריו לחיים ברחמים, ונאמן אתה לחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי הכל. Page 170. אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהללו חסלה. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש. And it is now my honor to pass over to advocate or barrister Warren Bank, who for many years was also a lay reader in Temple Israel here physically. And since leaving to the UK and I believe now Bermuda, he has continued to step up and help Temple Israel leading our services. Warren, I understand you're at work. I don't know if you're in court or in your office. I would have loved it if you could sing, because Warren is also a cantor. So up to you how you want to do this. Of course, we understand if it has to be low key. So please go ahead, Warren.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom to everyone. Thank you, David. And it's been wonderful to take part in this from behind my desk, even though I look as if I'm in Shul in Berlin. But that's the wonders of modern technology. I'll be happy to oblige and do some singing, even if the other staff members come running in to see if I'm okay. So at the top of the page, Ata kidashta et yom hashvi lishmecha, tachlit maseh shamayim v'va'aretz, uverachto mikol hayamim, v'kidashto mikol hazmanim, v'chen katuv b'toratecha, v'yachulu hashamayim v'yaharetz v'chol tzevaham, v'yachal Elohim, Vayom Hashavi v'melachto asher asa, vayishbot Vayom Hashavi mikol melachto asher asa, vayavarech Elohim et Yom Hashavi vayikadesh oto, ki vo shaval mikol melachto Asher bara Elohim לעשות. Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu, רצי במנוחתנו, קדשנו במצוותיך, ותן חלקנו בתורתך, ספיינו מטובך, ושמחנו בישועתך. ותהה ליבנו לעבדך באמת, והנחילנו אדוני אלוהינו באהבה וברצון שבת קודשך, וינוחו בישראל מקדשי שמך. ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת.
יישר כוח. Thank you so much, Warren, and your colleagues have been very privileged today. I hope they did hear what we just heard. We're on page 174. וצא אדוני אלוהינו בעמך ישראל, תפילתם באהבה תקבל, תהי לרצון תמיד עבודת ישראל עמך, אל קרוב לכל קורב, פנה אליו עדיך בכוננו, שפוך רוחך עלינו, at the bottom of the page, ותחזינה עינינו בשובך לציון ברחמים. ברוך אתה אדוני מחזיר שכינתו Letzion. We now go to the Modim prayer, which is the prayer of thanks, which I encourage all of us to read silently. Baruch atah Adonai hatov shimcha ulecha na'el lehutot. Blessed are you, Eternal One, whose name is goodness, and you are worthy of thanksgiving. Page 178. Shalom rav al Yisrael amcha tasim leolam, ki ata hu melech adon lechol hashalom, v'tov beinecha levarech et amcha Yisrael, b'chol et uv'chol sha'a b'shlomecha. בספר חיים ברכה ושלום ופרנסה טובה, נזכר וניכתב לפניך, אנחנו וכל עמך בית ישראל, לחיים טובים ולשלום. ברוך אתה אדוני עושה השלום. Page 180. In the middle. יהיו לרצון אמרי פי, והגיון ליבי לפניך, אדוני צורי וגואלי, אדוני צורי וגואלי. Please join me. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו amen. You can take the page down, Jacob. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל בני האדם. We now continue with our prayer for healing, which of course is unfortunately very, very relevant. It's always relevant, but it's particularly relevant in the times we live. And what I'd like to invite anybody who wishes to have a name included in our prayer for healing to please put it in the chat. We won't be able, with this size congregation, we can't really do it any other way. So feel free to just type it into the chat if you have a name for healing. Now is your chance. Give like just a few seconds to go ahead and do that. And we bear in mind right now all of those who are in need of comfort and of strength at this time. And on page 371 is the prayer for healing. מי שברך אבותינו ואמותינו אברהם, יצחק ויעקב, שרה, רבקה, רחל ולאה. הוא יברך את החולים. הקדוש ברוך הוא ימלא רחמים עליהם, להחלימם ולרפאותם ולהחזיקם, וישלח להם מהרה רפואה שלמה מן השמיים, רפואת הנפש ורפואת הגוף, השתה בעגלה ובזמן קריב, ונאמר אמן. We continue now with Aleinu L'Shabeach, which is on page 586. 586. And again, we face Jerusalem. עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר ראשית, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוצא את הארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו בגביהם רומרים, הוא אלוהינו אין עוד. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. page 588. שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסד הארץ ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל ושכינתו זו בגובה מרומים. הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, אמת מלכנו אפס זולתו, ככתוב בתורתו, וידעת היום בהשבות אל לבבך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל, ועל הארץ מתחת אין עוד. We now move to page 591. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד. We now move to the mourners Kaddish. And before we say Kaddish, again, same procedure. I invite any of you who want to add names that we will think about during the Kaddish. This is the time to put them in the chat. So please go ahead. We'll just give you a few seconds. Kaddish 598. So we'll go ahead and recite the Kaddish together. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, ועלמא דברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי, וחייכון ויומכון וחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב וימרו, אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם ולעלמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו. לעילה ולעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, תאמירן בעלמה וימרו, אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל, וימרו, אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל, וימרו, amen. Please be seated. And now I'm handing back to you, Reba, to introduce our closing speaker.
Our closing speaker, our closing rabbi.
Closing speaker.
I see. Okay, thank you. Just teasing. Actually, this is a speaker that I've really grown to love. Greg Flash is the chair of the South African Union of Progressive Judaism. And instead of asking him to bring his greetings right up front, I asked Greg if he would mind giving the concluding remarks on behalf of our progressive Judaism throughout South Africa. Greg, thank you for always being there when we need you. Over to you, Greg Flash.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you, Reba. Lovely to be here. What a wonderful tradition this is, and I'd love to celebrate in future years in person with you all. What an honor to be here, and so nice to see so many friends across the country. I can see Rabbi Nina Benjamin smiling at me there from Israel, who taught me in Cheder many years ago here in Cape Town, and Rabbi David is obviously an old friend, and so many, when I think about our movement and what we stand for and honoring Rabbi Super, and I didn't know Rabbi Super, sadly, but our movement has always been about social change, about social justice, be it fighting apartheid or prejudice, and it continues. And I think of the people that helped teach me, and some of them led the service tonight and spoke. It's amazing. Rabbi Super is one of those cogs that created and formed the strength of our movement, which continues. And I really like to thank everyone. I'll try and name everyone that was here. Rabbi David, Riva, for pulling everything together. And Rabbi David, wonderful to have to be this. David Bilchitz, Lael, Max, lovely to see you. Erwin, Marion, Hilton, Mervyn, and Warren. I don't think I've been on a service with somebody from Bermuda, so that's a first. Jacob running things in the background. And obviously Rabbi Super to honor him. And as I said, I think the key thing is to celebrate what we have as a movement in the past, fought for our Jewish values, and to continue that in this world that needs that, and to be more vocal and to do a lot. And Temple Israel Hillbrow is at the forefront, being one of the smallest congregations, is always making lots of noise and doing lots of good. And it's an honor to be here, and let's go forward. And I think also you can only be innovative and progress if you know your heritage. So that's why it's so important to know our history. Erwin's helped us with that. And that's why it's great to have this every year. And let's go forward and be together and do good for South Africa, for the Jewish world, for Israel, for everyone. So thank you, everyone. And Gemar Chatima Tova, and let us have a sweet new year, sweet, healthy, and happy new year. Shabbat Shalom.
Greg, thank you very much for those words. And it means so much to me that Temple Israel Hillbrow is the foundation on which this entire movement is built. And by all of you joining us tonight, we're honoring that foundation. And this is what's going to keep us together and create a really great movement, because under your chairmanship and the previous and those to come, we will think in unified terms and look forward to being part of the greater Jewish community here, valuing all streams and being part definitely of bettering everyone's lives in our beautiful country and the world. Greg, thank you. And Rabbi, without further ado, may we now go to our closing guest.
Yes, of course we may. And before we have one rabbi left on the screen, and we're saving her until last.
Exactly.
And but before then, I've just had an offer from Hilton Ellis, who's joining us from London, that if he can read the final benediction that Rabbi Super used to read in Temple Israel, and I thought that could be a wonderful way to segue into the Kiddush.
Yes.
So please go ahead.
Thank you, David. I'll be reciting it, not reading it.
Okay.
May the blessing of the divine providence rest on this congregation. May God grant our prayers, and may God give us the peace of this Shabbat Eve. Adonai Oz La'amo Yiten, Adonai Yevarech et Amo Shalom. May the Lord give strength to you, his people. May the Lord bless you, his people, the household of Israel, and all mankind, regardless of race, color, or creed, with his choicest blessing, his blessing of peace, now and forevermore. Amen. Shabbat Shalom. Good Shabbos to you all, and Shana Tova.
Amen.
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 Shabbat Shalom. That was wonderful. Riva, would you like to just give a word of introduction to?
Yes, I just want to say that was beautiful. And now let me introduce you to our surprise. South Africa is very fortunate to have the most wonderful, wonderful rabbi joining our team. And that is Rabbi Elisheva, who will be joining Bet David, and therefore as well continuing our long association between Bet David and Temple Israel. We've had the pleasure of already meeting. In fact, Rabbi Elisheva has given a service, and I know the hour is late, but Rabbi, it is so wonderful to have you back with us again. Thank you, Desmond and Bet David, for bringing this lovely rabbi to our shores. And Rabbi, it is over to you to conclude with our bruchas over the wine and the bread. Over to you, Rabbi Elisheva.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Riva. And I just was sitting in awe and listening to all of the amazing tributes to Rabbi Super and Hilton, your beautiful benediction for us at the end, that choicest blessing of peace. And I want to mingle that blessing of peace with joy. And I hope that you all have Kiddush cups floating around that you may fill to the brim with wine. And join me, I believe we're all on page 122. Vayahi erev vayahi boker yom hashishi vayechulu hashamayim ve'haaretz v'chol tzevam vayechal Elohim bayom hashvi'i melachto asher asa vayishbot bayom hashvi'i mikol melachto asher asa Vayivarech Elohim et yom hashvi'i vayikadesh oto ki bo Shabbat mikol melachto asher bara Elohim lasot. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu v'shabbat kodsho be'ava u'ratzon hinchiltanu zikaron lema'aseh bereshit ki hu yom techila lemikrahi kodesh Zecher l'tziat Mitzrayim. Ki eleinu karata v'otanu kidashta lavodatecha v'shabbat kodshecha v'ahava uvratzon hinchaltanu Baruch atah Adonai Mekadesh HaShabbat. L'chaim tovim.
L'chaim. Thank you, Rabbi. And although the hour is pretty late, let me just once again thank everyone for joining the first Shabbat Shuva service dedicated to the great rabbinical roots and leadership of our movement. Rabbi David, would you like to have anything to say at this point?
Yes, Shabbat Shalom, Shana Tova, Gemal Chatima Tova. Absolutely wonderful to see everybody. This might be a little bit ambitious, but I think we can, let's do it. Anybody who wants to open their microphone and just say Shabbat Shalom or say something. This is our version of an online schmooze, I suppose. Please feel free to do so.
And I must say, this is the biggest audience. This is the biggest congregation under one roof for Hashem that we've had. So please go ahead. It's over to you, those who'd like to just spend a few more minutes with us.
We nearly hit the 100 mark. You know that we only have 100, only have space for 100 on our Zoom account. So I was a bit worried about
Facebook.
Yeah.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
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 Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, David. כל הכבוד, חבר. ולראות אותך.
Shabbat
Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom,
everyone. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbos.
Shabbat Shalom from Helga.
Shabbat Shalom. Bye.
Shabbat Shalom to you from Helga.
See you tomorrow morning.
Yes, thank goodness someone remembered we've got a Shabbat Shuva service tomorrow morning. We'll go back. The tools will all be in their individual homes, but our hearts will be with all of you. So thanks, Hilda. Thanks, Robin. Thanks, everyone. The mics are still open and the cameras. Please continue.
Good night.
Riva,
Good night.
Yes.
I just want to tell you, I spoke to the nurse at the hospital for Peter, and they said he's still critical.
Okay, thank you for that. We will take that up immediately after the service and tomorrow morning. Thank you.
Hello,
Hello.
Okay, God bless. Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Shalom. Tov lirאות לכם, Sheva.
everybody. Thank you
Nina
very much.
Benjamin, my
Okay,
sister-in-law
Matva,
has
have a great Yom Kippur service, everyone. Have a great Yom Kippur service on
Thanks,
Wednesday and Thursday.
Can I just say that my sister, my elder sister, Heather Bubbly Rust, was one of the first bat mitzvahs with Rabbi Super in 1957.
Okay.
Wow. 1957.
No, he was
Wasn't
there.
there-
No. Rabbi
Young
Weiler.
came in 64.
Yeah, Rabbi Weiler, you mean, Marion?
Oh, yes,
Yeah,
sorry.
getting
My
confused.
apologies.
But it's still, that's still great. That's
Yeah,
what happened.
exactly.
Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Riva.
Cheers, Shabbat shalom. I go to the family. Bye, bye. Hey, Liba, Margaret. Hey, Peter and Mary.
Thank you, Rabbi Shaket,
Sweet.
for everything. Thank you for your support and your
Bye.
encouragement.
Great to see you. Really great to see you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Peter and Marion, haven't seen you for ages. Hilda, I think you wanted to say something. It's so nice to see people from other shores with us as well. And Nina Benjamin.
Thanks for a lovely service, Riva.
Thank you so much, Marion.
Riva, you really know how to pull things together. I mean, it's amazing.
From
Really.
your mouth to Hashem's ears. And remember, Hashem gave me a great partner for this, Rabbi David Benjamin. But thank you, Hilda. Appreciate that.
Terrific. If Max Price is still there, I'd like to.
I think he's gone already. Are you there, Max?
How courageous he was. I used to watch because I live very near to the Cape Town University. And I used to watch how he managed the students who were aggressive.
Yeah.
And it was dangerous. He was actually in a dangerous situation many a time with the whole business of fees must fall, etc. And I used to watch because I was walking my dog and I'd stand and watch what was going on there. He was amazing. His courage, the calmness in the way he spoke to them. And I tell you, sometimes I thought that he was going to be attacked because I know some people were, but thank heavens he survived it. But I must compare him in a way with Rabbi Super for that courage.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Hilda. That is wonderful, what you said. I was there too and I watched it.
I saw it so often.
And he once gave a lecture for me to the Gitlin Library about what drove him, and his Judaism drove him to do that was now Max Price, what he did. And now we know that it all comes also from Rabbi Super. So thank you for the wonderful evening.
Thank you, darling.
That's really Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye then.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Dave. I don't know if you do it, but Helga sends best wishes and regards to you and to Nina.
Thank you. Please send mine and Nina's, I'm sure. To her. We'd love that. That's wonderful to hear that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll pass it on.
Please do.
Who's left with us, David? Ronnie iPhone, I don't know who that is. George, I'd love to meet all of you. Naty, Desmond, you still
Desmond is hanging in.
I just want to say hello to you, David. How are you doing?
Hi, Desmond. Oh, great to see you. Fine. Yeah, we're hanging in there.
You're hanging in there. Good.
Yes.
Good to see you online. Lovely service. And of course, I forgot to say you're also a cantor.
Ah, well, sort of.
Yeah, you are.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. By the way, Cantor Warren Bank, you know, he wrote to me in the chat and he said he was, you know, he's not only a cantor, he's an expert on Jewish liturgy and music, etc. So he said, you know, Lewandowski, you know, I was kind of a bit glib and I said he was a reform. He wasn't really a reform, but he was liberal. In other words, at that stage, the reform movement wasn't really defined as a separate denomination just yet, okay? But they were putting organs into the synagogues and you know, etc. So that was he pointed that out, and of course that's
so
correct.
Warren sang in our choir for some time, and then he was also part of the Lewandowski choir in Johannesburg.
Okay.
Lewandowski chorale, which my wife Ashley was actually the chair lady for a while, as well as the chorister. And that background that Warren had of the Shul in Berlin is where the Lewandowski chorale, there's a festival annually where the Lewandowski chorale,
yes,
Lewandowski festival happens in that synagogue.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah,
it's really something. In fact, there's a Jewish museum in Berlin. You can listen to recordings of the choir at the museum. You know, you push a button and you get these singing Lewandowski.
Yeah, we actually went to that festival. What was it, about 2017? Yeah.
Oh wow. Yeah, it's quite something.
Yeah,
it is something. Beautiful music. Anyway, lovely service. Thank you. Looking forward to seeing you in South Africa.
Yeah, sooner.
Thank you, Desmond. Tell him.
Yeah. Looking forward to, Desmond, and to seeing you in Israel.
Yeah, that too, hey? In Jerusalem and in your hometown.
This year in Jerusalem.
Baruch Hashem.
Yeah.
Baruch Hashem. Ian, would you like George, the people who are still with us remain? I'd love to say hello to all of you. I mean, I'm on my own for dinner, so I don't have to rush. I'm sure my David and Bonnie Foreman, my cat and dog, don't mind waiting a bit longer.
I just want to say thank you, Reva. We're going to run.
Pleasure, Desmond. Thank you.
So wonderful what you put together.
Good night,
Thank
Desmond.
you so much. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. And so is it just the three of us now?
No.
No, gone? Who else is left with us?
No, we have 16 people still on.
I'd love to meet them. You know, I'd love to know who you are, where you are, and what you look like.
Not everyone, you know. Some people have good reason to turn off their cameras. No, we don't.
I normally do as well, but maybe you'd
the,
like to say a few things and I'll just look at your name.
We don't code. If any one of our camera off guests would like to say something, please do. We won't force you to put on your camera. But they might have just left their positions. That's also possible. They left their posts.
Yeah. I think so. I think so. Yeah. All right, then, David, all I can say is thank you. Perhaps I didn't realize the mammoth task that we were as usual, taking on. But I don't know if Jacob's still with us. And
yes, Jacob's there.
Yeah, I know he doesn't like thanks, but I want to thank him so much.
Yeah.
Everything went extraordinarily well. I think Temple Israel Hillbrow has achieved much tonight. It's another milestone. And thank you, David, for your brilliant idea of honoring a rabbinical root. So Nina, thank you for giving us David.
I didn't give him to you. He's mine.
Oh, yeah.
He belongs to me.
Nina, thank you for lending him back to South Africa and Temple Israel and Progressive Judaism. All right, David, the concluding word is yours. Even if it's just us chickens here, you can say a few words. We'll say Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach, and Baruch Hashem will speak soon for the next major event. Thank
you. Just lovely. It's lovely to see you all. Really, it's It's incredible. And actually, you know, it is a blessing. I mean, we only really started doing this, you know, after the corona came. And of course, this is something we will maintain, you know, including when the corona is over, you know, in a few months' time, please God, I hope. Even when we get back to meeting physically, we'll still have the online option.
Yeah.
I think we've, in that sense, we moved into a new era.
Definitely.
And it's great. I mean, this is really something. This is history being made.
For sure. And it's good having you back on our bimmer, David. And thank you for everything you do for Temple Israel. And thank you for everything you will do going forward as well for Temple Israel Heritage Center.
My pleasure in advance.
Second, Shabbat Shalom. Great.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Oh, there's my Romain. Shabbat Shalom.
That is lovely. What a
Lovely.
wonderful service, Riva. It was so special and lovely, lovely to see you all. And I wish you all a Shana Tova and Gamar Chatima Tova.
Romain, yeah. Isn't that wonderful, David, to see Romain?
Amazing. That's fantastic. Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. It was very, very special. Thank you all.
Thank
Shabbat
you.
Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
God bless.
Um,
Bye.
I have a hungry family here who they need to be attended to. So I'm taking up the living room right now. So I better, better say.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Say good night.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, Rabbi.
Shabbat Shalom.
Good night, everyone.
Bye, Serena. Bye, Nina.
Bye.